Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, "How should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom?" Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight and so on, until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so on, to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teyata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharad Bhattiputra and Noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
So the time passes very rapidly in this such a busy schedule, and our mind is wandering and remaining under the power due to the power of mental wandering. And so, though we are caught up in such a in a hustle and bustle situations of our life, daily, our life of daily activities. Yet at the same time, we're taking this opportunity to gain something that is, to achieve something that is very important for all of us. Though by receiving such teachings and giving the teachings of the Dharma, we may not be able to see any direct result out of that. We are actually, implanting a very important seeds, very essential seeds within our continuum.
ndo somba na ye chu chi nymo che me ndo so yang da che ye de somba na ye ne ji kyno yi to na sa kanga la chön se ke yo ma da yang no che yi to no la chu so ro mo do se ge de yang so so la ra le yin zan de ya ke chen bo ro.
So then here both the teacher and also the listeners, whether once giving the teachings or listening to the teachings of the Dharma become a Dharma or not, it entirely depends upon. Even though that you may not have a bad intention of receiving, you may not have a negative intentions, yet at the same time, due to our intellect, the level of our intellects, some of the listeners or the teachers' teachings may become a Dharma and others may not.
다 되게 ngone ji so so ngone da ge chenbo ji da za chenbo ji zene ani ji che chenye ja sa de di jing ye lao na ye ji da da ga ge ne ge de ji la so so ji go na ne so na ji me ja wa che ani de bo tu byong la re ji la ma so ji ko de sa ge de de la so so yo ba che ani ya so so ji go me ba ja rang ge ta go de ne rang ge chen ye pha ma ji be je to ne ba 다 여기 선제 사나 도나래 근데 소소 대사게 사자 되네 zon데 네 봤지 스마 갈래바 미바제나래 까지 되지긴 로 지 소대제 인체절라 대화되지 동해만 대화 있잖아 네 대화 네 간저제 그래 동해 간저 빵고 그래서네 되게 네 정보보다 네 만원한테 차라만원 성에데 되는 수비 나마처럼 나지 뒤에는 게들이 대시비 단다라는 가서 각각이 냥돌라 친해체게 요요서지 아니 되게 손아에 연비 단다라는 가서 메바 테스트적이다.
So now it is important for us, all of us, to take this time, the very short time that we are gathering, as a very, consider this as a very precious, very important. So as we mentioned earlier, that we are taking this such a wonderful opportunity to engage in receiving the teachings of the Dharma. So by valuing one's time and our gatherness, so focus on cultivating a positive motivations by visualizing Buddha in front of oneself, surrounded by the great lineage gurus of the Lam Rim, and yourself being in their presence, surrounded by entire sentient beings, including one's parents, and think that just as I myself wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings, so too all other sentient beings have a similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. May all the Buddhas in whose presence I'm being here and receiving my teachings to achieve happiness for myself and leading other sentient beings, entire sentient beings, to the state of ultimate happiness. It is as this for purpose I'm receiving these teachings of the Dharma. So with this kind of motivations, let's focus on our on visualizing the Buddha, to cultivate appropriate motivations for a couple of minutes for meditation.
맞아 선제되는 게 산도들이 단대 치지 저도 배나 대화 대비 생장 동행이 줄라 네 뭐바 주세 동현 돈도에 생여장 대유제의 data 정세대 맞서 나한테 되는 지로 그래서 돈에 니 진짜로 손아래 두고도 다 뺏게 좀 더.
So then think about, you can think about the verse that's, although that we have, sentient beings have a wish to achieve happiness, but our actions lead to sufferings. Our actions actually become a cause for sufferings. We wish to overcome sufferings, and we do not undergo sufferings. There's none of beings who have a wish to undergo sufferings. Yet at the same time, they destroy the cause of happiness as if it is their enemy. So just like we ourselves, how unable to recognize what is the cause of happiness or the cause of sufferings, so too all other sentient beings have a similar, caught up in similar confusion, situations. So therefore, let's cultivate a compassion for all other beings.
나 단지 되는 거래 추는 저는 이게 단지 거래 맞추어 나 만나와지 간대진은 냐는 제거래서나 아니 맞저기 아니 라니기 제진로 가서 간시지시 송아예세데 랑기 치타와진데 지네 아니 지바도 제진데 대통령이 덤비기 송시지 말로버지데 제선라네 아니 될라 천년전에 아니 소저저거에 그 가서 다 세미 전랑이 레가지로
So now it is important to ensure that the way we practice, our practice must be based on unmistaken stages. It should be a correct, our sequence of practice must be correct. So which will be able to, one will be able to achieve a spiritual result out of properly sequenced, out of practice of properly sequenced practices. Just as by following the Buddha's teachings, just as who has seen the phenomena, the ultimate phenomena, or the truth of phenomena by himself, and shared his experiences, his knowledge with us. So just follow someone who has gone through these experiences and and in other words, that we were just following our practice must be followed by the logical reasonings, not just as spiritual belief or some kind of belief without having any rationale, but rather our proper sequence of practice must be followed by this valid reasonings.
Tenriki shiji malo bagi tenbi tenpa tenya nga tsuki ngone dushe chana yiri mo shivu tse mendo nidong kasa ngaji chuji chigi myansu disen ro mendo zhe nga tsu chala danji ten chatsi teni shi yudi chudu chigi shivu da tenriya ki maro nizane tenriki lami jini debi susu ki chenche sayi lami bado menga jima chiba tanda rangi kansa penshung ro de tanda le jima chiba shiji malo ba 땡에게 덤바 세너리 펜바 세너리 게겐 세너리 다당가 무슨 제 연애에 들어와.
Such a proper teachings, unmistaken teachings, who has unmistaken teachings given by the Buddha himself, the 2,500 years ago. When you think about 2,500 years ago, it is not really, it is not much time that we really think about it. Sometimes when we think about, discovering some archaeological effects, we would say that it has been like 10,000 years to 20,000, even million years ago. But then when it comes to the Buddha, it is just only 2,500 years ago, who had gained who gone through such practices and achieved the spiritual realizations. And whatever the spiritual realization that he had gained, it transmitted to his followers, all the way transmitting one follower after another, in other words, the unbroken chain of lineage up until one's spiritual teachers. So that is the kind of teaching that we are receiving, the teachings of the unbroken lineage of the teachings of the Dharma.
Tentriki lama de nga so chi thari ba se ma ta da changwo no je ani nga so ye je yo tentriki tembe che ye de song shang ye nya ga che sho de ani nga so ye ni rang jin zin de dang zin ye de re do se na song sha jo de la ani changwo ro je nge rang jin zin ye me de la shang chu sen to ne ani she de cha gu do da jin zin me de da me to be lo ga ne ni nga la ta ra yin gu du chi rang se che sho se na da da ngo to na zin ye da da ka sa song sabu nga so ye ye de ro da.
So therefore, it is very fortunate for all of us to be able to receive a direct instructions from the realist beings such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where he had said that once receiving of the teachings of the Dharma must become a remedy for self-cherishing and self-grasping mind, because it is this self-cherishing, self-grasping mind which binds us within this unenlightened bondage, unenlightened existence. So therefore, we should, if we were to consider ourselves as a real spiritual practitioner or the Dharma practitioner, one must follow the teachings that is given by great qualified teachers such as His Holiness.
Yeah. 인터넷 된tri기 찔려는 된tri기 가서 가서 매는 마서 매조는 마서는 된tri기니 당가서 좀 코너 봐시나 아니 된tri기 냥내 제발라 냥내 제스디 해버려 셰발라 토고 투비 좀데 아니 지 자체산에 셰네 봐 제네 간주포 자니 자케제 된tri기 좀 해셔지 쇼지도 넘베 아니 상초랑저린 봐 생에니 데른 가서 거서 봐봐 친이 집에 좀데 된tri기 소속이 지 응내 내가 전부 쇼지라 맞 줘도야지. So
this is such a teaching that we are receiving. And so here now, we always emphasize on whenever we receive the teachings, we're advised not mere receiving, but practice, right? Whatever the teaching that you have received must be practiced. This will give you a result. So therefore, first, one must think about practicing Dharma. In order to practice Dharma, one must understand what is meant by Dharma. In order to understand, one must receive the teachings of the Dharma. So when speaking about receiving the teachings, we're not talking about the a number of volumes of the teachings, such as Kangyur or Tengyur, like 200 and 300 volumes. Well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the particular teaching that we're receiving today, which serve as a synopsis of those entire teachings, which bring together the key points of entire teachings, entire path that is being taught by the Buddha, which is the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment.
Tendriki yongza chenpo tenyang chi soso ke chenyen tere chebe kala, tosan chebe kala, soso chiko tenda chenen rigi mare. Ani thoma, ani chebe tamba rani yin di son gobe miye de, ani rangshin tena rodo shesena son shen jore. Rangshin, rangyo tena ta shinga nala, dela chenyen chego re, jenjo tena ta shinga nala, dela chenyen chego yin zane, ani chenyen che si tena mano wachi, gore, so eti.
So such a precious teaching that we are receiving and practicing, one must cultivate the motivations. The precious teaching that I am receiving and I'm practicing is not only solely for one's own self, but for the benefit of all other sentient beings. Therefore, we find in the text where it's stated that in order to fulfill the wishes of self and others, one must engage in the practice such as this, the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Whether to fulfill one's own wishes or working for the fulfillment of others' wishes, this is the kind of teaching that is inevitable.
Sache jeba dambanga jalama cheta che rimba tela tsai sache ni lanji zawa shenye tembe cheta tena lo cheta jan rimba ni nge tani gama she de sache soso ko den roji
sache ni ka sume rumche
tanda nge thama de dombo so de sache dombo so yoro dombo so ko den roji peche otu gure de sache jeba tela tsai sache ni de ani pa chi rada to shalochi.
So with this general explanation, the introduction that I have made covers three outlines, the three major outlines of the Lam Rim Chenmo. And the fourth outline is the greatness of the enabling one to understand that all of the scriptures are instructions for the practice. And the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught, the actual instructions, how to rely on the teacher, the route of path, and how the students train their mind after having relied on teacher.
That tenelo cheta jay rebala nieche te tena nimbo lembi shu kuwa dan nimbo cheta lembi chu nieche ta tombo reza ta nimbo cheta lembi chu tela ya nieche lanchi na jala nge ba che se de nimbo len chu ngoche ta tombo reza ta nimbo len chu ngo tela sonche chubu chungyo da timo na je remba nyasa len chu chubu ren da timo na je remba nyasa len chu chubu chembyo na je remba nyasa len chu ta tombo ni reza ta chubu chembyo na je remba nyasa len chu la sai sa je sonche 대전은 주변 고단바 생제 코나된바 생제 지다지비치 생제의 쉐발로 로체스 다 대송전은 가서 다 거서 봐봐 아니 생제의 쉐발로 로체스 아니 자이 주변 가서 주변 챔비 용시발라 사제송이 타마데 라 거서 보데여서 생제의 쉐발로 로체스에 들려서나데.
So we are under the chapter of the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment of the the great capacity, the path for the person of great capacities. Under the great capacities, we're on the particular chapter. We're under the particular chapter of having having gone through that generation of bodhicitta, having read or having understood the generation of practicing the generation of bodhicitta, will then be followed by the Chöpa how to engage in the conduct, the way of engaging in the conducts.
대체 다만 속에 대체 생각이 될어요. 과학의 수수지식이다. 너무 대체 임에도 가다서는 대체 임에도 생체 코나 임에라 딱 그래서야 돼. 내가 좀 레시피기 라레치 뭐 시차비 소소게 로정선들이 대체세도 고발해서기 너무 렌서 때네 인치민지 된 거였잖아.
생계 코나선 말이지.
대체는 주고 고당바 생체 코나 때바 세디 대바체쇼 생각이 메리드 이제 개개 많이 봐지. 근데 상추기 생 코나기 지스던 거래 세제로.
So now what is meant by the Mahayana, the followers of the Mahayana teachings? In other words, what really, what kind of criteria that needs to be fulfilled to become oneself like a Mahayana practitioner? It is entirely depends upon whether or not one is following the teachings of the great spirit of enlightenment, in other words, the bodhicitta.
오늘 드리나 원하스 상주기 센터 센제네 상주기 센 간제 장고래 간제 제거 상주 센장제 가르제세디 사제니 발레디 제차고 슈지도아.
So then if this is the case, then this will then be followed by, then how do we practice bodhicitta? In what manner that we can practice bodhicitta?
다 sombatela ini senche tanga sanje sala dogoro sanje sala do de kenle tanja shu chimbo de jesade ta sanje sala do la nge lengo kare pe go gore se jero leka kande che gore se tere.
So now having done that, then what kind of the practices or the activities that I may engage in order to reach the state of enlightenment?
되게 정신적으로 소소게 생유토는 고하기 정신적으로 그냥 상주기 생시에 상주 생장치기 아니 명안이기 상주 생장치에 되네 아니 상주 생이 상하지 제비거라 상주 생이 담발랭 거래 아니 딘지 거지라 아니 제라 아니 상주 생이 쇼발라 하고 그래 세네 마수지 강르게 저만토나라 용치기 과해서 저래 마수지 로동 되게 빠데 되지고.
So it is important to, set, properly, in other words, the sequences of those practices in our mind by first, what makes oneself to become a Mahayana practitioner. Having known that, then how do we really engage in the practice of cultivating bodhicitta? Once we have cultivated the bodhicitta, and how do I really engage in the bodhisattva deeds in order to gain the state of enlightenment? So, and how by cultivating the bodhicitta, in order to cultivate the actual bodhicitta, one should understand and why should I receive the precepts of the bodhisattvas and so forth.
데 주요되지 맞아나 데 가는 내가 정원로지 상주센데 개첨부 쇼르에서는 쇼주기 치 쇼라커를 장도에기 맞속이 대코노 찍고를 봐지 카톡 유저네 란지레 제토네 제토야 거려요 말아 대학원에도 뒤수 정원로지 소해데 쇼주다 자와시로던 저기 치코노 니바첨부 쇼지 타나 코노 찍고 장샤에 되게 로요 반에 되는 용투고 말아 미니아 요네 사제텔레 헤비 거기 되더라 다 미니아 통모 요새들 아니기 마셔 인선 대치고지 취지 줘 내도나 나솔레 되게 용하대 해두고 말이다 정원로지 코노 용하 체니도 참빌레네 콤바 토칼레네 슈비 거로와 땅가서 콤바 원데네 계산원데 작으로와 데 소소 고알레 그래.
So His Holiness always advises the practitioners importance of engaging in the practice of bodhicitta, the cultivation of bodhicitta, by citing from Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life very often, as well as the fundamental wisdom of middle way, treatise on the wisdom of middle way. So when His Holiness is citing all those important verses of how to cultivate bodhicitta, just by following those verses that has been cited by His Holiness will not really enable us to cultivate the bodhicitta. So therefore, the most important part is here, we need to know how to cultivate bodhicitta and what is the sequences, which kind of sequences that one need to follow in order to cultivate bodhicitta are very, 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 very crucial, because we are unlike the great practitioners such as His Holiness himself. You know, His Holiness has already gone beyond, already reached on top of the steps. We are beginning of steps. And in other words, we are beginning of the stages. And He's already reached beyond the stages. So just by reciting this one verse is something very effective for him or herself. But for us, we have to have all this in our mind prior to listening to those, the verses.
사체들 로니오 사체다 메데 하고겐지나 메다와데 나서 피게데 롱올레 차유에지로 근데 차도 그러면 아주 상추 센스로요디 dimban인데 저로랑지레 차통에 들려서 냐뉴유 토노로라 dimban인데 여로지 차유디 상추 생게 코츠요 되면은 상추 센스로요디 아주 명고메싱이 미고도 소리 질레서나 다데 되게 말와 다 가족이 체받는 질레도 정으로 지는 거죠.
So it is therefore, we need to, first of all, to making sure that you have a proper understanding of what is meant by bodhicitta. How do we cultivate bodhicittas? At the moment the bodhicitta or the teachings of the bodhicitta is introduced, you're able to understand, you're able to have at least, by the generic image of what is meant by bodhicitta. It is just like the place, if one has never been to certain places, a certain place, and someone talks about that particular place and also talks about the person who lives in that particular place, you will not be able to have any idea what he or she is talking about. You'll not be able to have any, generic images or generic image when someone talks about the place or the place that you have never been, a person that you have never known and you have never seen. However, if you have gone to that particular place and have seen the person who is living in that particular place, though you are not in that particular place with that person, you are in a completely different places. But when someone talks about that place and the person who lives in that particular place, you're able to have this generic image. Similarly, if you're able to get all those, the proper understanding of what is meant by bodhicitta, how to cultivate bodhicitta, that at the moment that you hear even one verse of cultivating bodhicitta, you'll be able to, have a proper understanding. You're able to have at least the generic image of what is meant by bodhicitta.
아니 소소게 텔 공지 땡이나 소소게 강시바지 이게 쇼그지 큰요 텔 맞지 아니 좀 상추 생각고야나 동보 연구하는 로고요 연구 생에 될 로란드르지 해서나 라틴라 사나동 아니 디제라 아니 마시 텐텐고는 로자나도 신바 아니 다진연구고는 로자나도 신바 아니 디지 거지라 아니 진짜 좀 생이 좀 되는 하서 되는 상추 생들지 레고요다 생이 소소게 쇼그지는 막 소소 과할 강해 투디지 라바지 마지 니네 소소 되네잖아요 니마르라 지 까마치 장서 대타티 좀 뒤서 뭐부터 땅두고 말해 되게 공지 되네 아니 강지 저와이나 아니 샤추 센세 지 로요한테 나서 코드 쳐야지. 단 내려 하고 이제 로서 전에 야말 당가서 내려 시타로다 지제도는 토리마도 사실 깨깨 두고 말이. 하나 선제 내려 전에 아니 좋아지 타용으로 와.
So that I'll cover the earlier translation that I forgot one thing what which he had said was that at the moment that when the teachers talk about the bodhicitta consists of two aspirations, you're able to grasp onto it. You're able to understand what is meant by the two aspirations. Okay. So then, Paul, in order to achieve bodhicitta, as we have gone through this teachings earlier, you should set this in your mind by understanding that in order to cultivate bodhicitta, first of all, one must cultivate renunciations, right? Renunciations. Having cultivated renunciations, then one should follow those instructions of either instructions of the sevenfold cause and effect, instructions of the cultivating body, practicing bodhicitta, or one follows the equalizing and exchanging self with others instructions. In order to cultivate such, then you should understand, in order to generate bodhicitta, in order to cultivate bodhicitta, one is perfect one's cultivation of great compassion. In order to perfect this great compassion, one must perfect one's resolute intentions and so on and so forth. So you should have everything, in other words, you should set up all those sequences of practicing bodhicitta within one's mind state. So if we were to spend at least a couple of minutes or the 5 minutes engaging in such practice in our day-to-day life, we'll then familiarize yourself with such practice. So this is the kind of practice, that we should be engaging in. There's no any other, practice which is superior than this for us.
mechi cha soina tela la shide ji goya ji ya mare tela la rani la sana to as ke go maro aso goya de shide ro.
So if one is able to cultivate bodhicitta, practice bodhicitta properly, then it says one will be loved by all beings, in other words, including devas, non-humans, spirits, and all of them, regardless of where we stay, how we are conditioned maybe, but we are being loved and cared by all those other beings. So what else we need other than this, right? What we need is we need a peace of mind.
Ngazola sana to chi do chongro che ye tenchi ka nganye de thong so che do ngazo sheba yi sana tong do che ne ju ye yu zhong de thong yu de ka la so so ge chona yi thong no lo la yu zhong de yi dong wa de so tu ge sa ro yin ji ro da ngazo se ba me chi bi ka le ka re me ge yi jin ka de chi thong so na ko lo chona me ge cha ji do ne chi ka nga nye de thong tu do so ye de ngaso sana doyo do ngaso ina none jena senje so den ji me na nye kan de thong gur se je ro de yin sa ma ro kanga ku ji pa rang yi ji ka sa ji ga bo che sa ki ji yu do ji thong yu go sa ro ne de ji kanga.
So therefore His Holiness always said that if one is able to undertake this practice of bodhicitta very seriously, then everything that appears to you become a favorable condition for oneself. It's a desired, condition for oneself, desired object for oneself, in other words. Including, environment and the beings who are living within this environment, or the contents or continents or the content becomes a favorable condition for oneself.
ya, tangi logi da de, da sumba senji ne shoba la lo zi la song, senji ne shoba la lo gobi jansen, tashi re re wa la lo be sanje minju ba tenba, lo ba la lo be rinba nishe ba wo song de, zai saji song.
So we're at the page 85. We're on page 85. How to learn the Bodhisattva's deeds after developing the spirit of enlightenment, right? It says, how to learn the Bodhisattva's deeds after developing the spirit of enlightenment has 3 parts. The reason why you must learn the trainings after developing the spirit of enlightenment, demonstrating that you will not become a Buddha by learning either method or the wisdom separately, explanation of the process of learning the precepts.
사체 코로기 생에 코로 매용되는 진짜다 된바다 지 견다요 가서 로사 맹게 소리지 저 메서 송이 봐 정으로 저런 뭐 챙기 메시지 마지 사제 정도도 치기 대서 저선은 니 봐시고 주어서 통화 주어서도 사제 코로 송이 도는 고알연소나 될지 나저 영이 지긴 주스게 나가지마도 지 대파 진센센 로그 진센진 매바 코로 송이 오래.
So it's a very unique and exclusive style of Lama Tsongkhapa's writing. Whenever you look at the Lama Tsongkhapa's writings and his, text that is composed by text which is composed by Lama Tsongkhapa, right from the beginning and looking at this, the outlines, you will see it is properly laid out, free from contradictions, and free from complications, in other words. That's a very unique feature of Lama Tsongkhapa's writing.
되지. 다 되다. 내가 소이지 떠러 터시를 가서 세진은 터시로 가려야래. 아니 로나 터서 내가 쉬어봐대라. 아니 가서 터대라. 아니 싫어지 차도다. 아니 터지 차도스 니 싫어. 터도 싫어서 내리. 아니 다시 니서는 니여로. 그래서 이래저래잖아 상지 두고 말해. 너무 아니 터시라 말로는 상지 민주비 진짜 가르래. 어나 터시라 로고에나 터시니까 매바 지용고 말에 가르래. 아니 대니가 매연비 진짜 참소시에서서나 아니 다시네 쇼발 로그인 세대로.
So it's very clear, if you look at this, the way he laid out the parts the 3 parts that's laid out, says the reason why you must learn the training after developing the spirit of enlightenment, right? That's the first, the reason. And then then next it says, demonstrating that you will not become a Buddha by learning either method or the wisdom separately. If you just practice and perfect it, either one of this will not become oneself as a Buddha. Then it says, then next third outlines, but it's explicitly, clearly it's mentioned by saying that explanation of the process of learning the learning the precepts.
this is that on 대다 maybe sen체네 짐발라 소별 로바 샤와라 메로바 대양 샴비 난타 샴비 넘바 타비 롱탄네 카페체 메장 샹추 셈비 로바라 주바진보 마자나 찬제와 미시베 로바 샤데 가양고리 레 송도.
Let's read through the text here. The reason why you must learn the trainings after developing the spirit of enlightenment. It is indeed the case that great benefits come from mere development of the aspirational spirit of enlightenment without learning the trainings of generosity and so forth. Consider in this regard the passage from the life of Maitreya, cite clearly. However, you you still have to practice the Bodhisattva's training. If you do not emphasize this practice, you will never become a Buddha. So learn Bodhisattva's deed. That's the foremost of Gaiases.
Tero nga so chedayena shambe namba taben do ne so de shangchu ge pensen cheba zang je je ses ro gore ani riju karsa riju gone se goro ulmar riju gone ani nyarang da chambala so ba senju ne gore se ne pen sanji mecha baro shangchu sen ranji le cheba zo senje ze na ba cho da ba se ge de so sha yores yin na yang shangchu ge sen ye riju pen 타야 받지 요나야 아니 사제발라 이지미지 쇼발라 호거레스 제체데
So although in the passage from the life of the Maitreya has stated earlier by saying that indeed the case genetic benefit from in it says it's just mere, in other words, it's just mere developing aspirational spirit of enlightenment without learning the trainings of generosity and so forth. One will be able to, one will retain the name of Gewese, which is the victorious son, or the son of the Buddha, son of a Buddha. And it actually suppresses the other lineages of such as Pratika and Sherpakas, just mere doing that. However, in order to attain complete state of enlightenment, just mere generation of experiential spirit of enlightenment alone is not sufficient, it's not adequate. It requires a further practices of Bodhisattva's deeds. One must follow this proper sequence, the practices of the Bodhisattva's deeds. Just like although that we may have a very, kind-minded, but very kind and very compassionate, just remaining kind and compassionate alone is not sufficient, right? We need to engage in the practice and use one's compassionate attitude. Make this compassionate attitude practical. This will give rise to a fruition. Otherwise, cultivating a compassion and remaining in one particular place is not going to be fruitful.
Laba de ngazo lanzon dero ngenjo shangchu sen na gongshi chang subi sawa jeba mini be deshi tende do be thola be se dero ko shangchu sen de koroni la gong de shi kasegi ya bo chen ro de ya na ya nyanga chesho de ngazo ge mari ba de sen ne tende ge thola be ne sanje san ro ro.
So it is very clearly mentioned in the three principal aspects of the path. The renunciation, though, can never bring the total bliss, right? Total bliss of the matchless Buddhahood, unless it is bounded by the highest wish. And so we seek the high wish for enlightenment. So just, once, just having the renunciation and cultivating bodhicitta alone will again not really become a actual cause for gaining the state of enlightenment. In order to gain the state of enlightenment, it requires multiple causes and conditions. Cultivation of bodhicitta and following the actual practices of the bodhicitta, or the deeds of the bodhisattva.
Ni dada jese shola ison yala deda thanje ne tube shero tendo sonse di yang pashe tombok na la soba ge te so shoba yoso zoba de ni toni tobi shero de parashin ba ranji le chibi tanda le resa na so yaro sho dong de jaw de ji le tene ini oma le tene ngama le tene ni jebe shima de ini yaran ro go ye ni ko bari ro ma to chen yu di ta ba yu do.
So therefore again we find in the Guide to the Bodhisattva of Life where he stated that all those practices, the above practices, which referring to the practice of generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, and concentrations. All of those practices must be converged on the practice of wisdom that understands the ultimate nature of reality.
Gaya gori le shanchu ne drupa nyingbo shebi shanchu samba chenpo nangji yinchi loba drupa nyingbo sheba nangji ne mayin no shedan tingin zinji jabo le te na drupa nyingbo sheba wo te chi she she na jinu te chi she she na se te ba de lo cheta.
So enlightenment is the great bodhisattvas who take practice to heart, but not for those who take a wrong practice to heart. And the King of Concentration Sutra also says, therefore, take practice to heart. Why, O Prince? Because when you take practice to heart, the perfect enlightenment is not hard to attain.
Nga tsu mige zai saje mige nipa dela di dela nyingbo lenbi shi kuwa se dela ringi tongbo dene mige tante di jubu de sanje ge sala ya chiye ye kuma tonsa de chirangi di den dela nyingbo lenbi tuanda la lekati chegore da se kuma chene lenjo chirowa nyingbo de karre sana zobe sanje jo kumbo derowa.
So therefore it is encouragement for us to gain, how we can engage in the practice to gain the state of enlightenment. In other words, how can we extract the essence of our, precious human rebirth? By the essence here referring to the complete state of enlightenment.
Nimbi lensi de shichi malo ba langa chen ronge che na kale yo mares langa lopa la cheso na debinde yo marwa sebo se jarwa.
So if one is able to engage in practice unmistakenly, appropriately and unmistakenly, it is not that hard to gain the state of enlightenment. If one follows the mistaken path, regardless of how much effort that you may put forth, you will not be able to gain any fruits out of So, Prince, because when you take the practice, when you take the practice to heart, the perfect enlightenment is not hard to attain. Practice means the method of achieving Buddhahood. Learning the Bodhisattva's training. Let's take Let's take a 10 minutes break.
Sanje jendo mende be oye roge nando jeno jobo yo ye dongo rana mende longo no yo do yo me aya 당연 또 마시 쇼가 마시 there, Tanga to in the Gon Roa. Tanga to Jedanga to in the any Jubanim Jupa city, Jubanimbo city, so get Taja to me to Jagoro. Me to Jane, any Juba, the Kajuba says on any Karsa me so Jane, they tend the Lengope Jero. They saw the me so that any Tamanemi Yande Jija. They do be turned out any Sanchu Sanjay, any just as you shop any temperature say there are. The drug just as you shop a lobala, any Karsa College Majavan Jabutangmari say there are. Mischievous, so.
So, in order to achieve what we call is the actual achievement, which would be the state of enlightenment, right? So this would be our objective. To achievement of enlightenment is our objective. So in order to reach that objective, in other words, in order to achieve this objective, one then needs to go through all those process of practices, right? Such as generation of bodhicitta, followed by the practice or the deeds of the bodhisattvas, and all those instructions and practices are followed in order to gain the state of enlightenment, or in other words, the non-abiding nirvana, or the non-abiding nirvana. So this need to be accomplished by means of following all those processes without putting in any efforts. The attainment of enlightenment will not become automatic.
Yang Juba Nimbo Shebane Zobe Sanji Komotaka Mayina said, Yang Juba Nimbo Koron Lang Koron Manoan and Koron Rana, Richie Gonzich and Kale Joswaina, and Zobe Sanchu Kohonia, the Yankaguma de Sondoa. In Zanangasoji Lamano and the Salamano Corindo with Toman and the Chaja, which it did, meeting the Ganja and Rotunga Jensona, Tesanji Kale Yamar Sondoa.
So therefore, it's also mentioned that it's not gonna be, it won't be that difficult if you follow the proper sequence, proper order, in other words, an unmistaken path or the practices. Gaining the state of enlightenment is not that hard if you're able to, engage in the proper practice.
Jiri Ramochi Tembalanjana, and Nidiji Testonjilo Sonju Kovania said, Jil Shoson Sonju Kovania, Tando Soyero. Pena Deja Leda Tandula, Yoncho German, John Rojigeta, G. said Sanjire Dumado, and in Gomolu that Papa Garsa, Jezim Malada to the Kanga, Mundua Sondoa. Takanje Tendriki, Kanje. Leda Deja yes and Jigo, Kajet and Sala Mano, Jelangini, and tell her to what you put shares on ina. I'm going to Sanjay Sala and Doi and the Tanda Nekong and Sanjay Sala and Domi, Sanjay that the checking is a Jibutambatan Hale Yondra. Kopatoy, chatting Chandana, Sanjay it under, and then Neko taking his song a but Santa Git and Doa.
So if one is able to follow the proper sequence of practices and follow this, all this, the practices that are unmistaken. And then we have a saying that possibility of gaining enlightenment within one's brief lifetime, within one single lifetime. Although His Holiness says it is just not easy to gain the state of enlightenment within a single lifetime. Think about all other great beings who have gone through rigorous efforts from life after life, such as Nagarajunas and Milarepas and so on. But if you really follow, those sequence properly, stages of the practice properly, there is possibility. And there are some beings who, though they may have gained the state of enlightenment, they remain in this cyclic existence, unenlightened existence, for the benefit of other beings.
다 거의 선생이 내던도도 거의 내던도고 근데 간제지 제는 제고네 마 제요데 네 쇼발 호치마 제요데 은 동보 상주 삼바나제네 라만디 바진 디토메바다 송요데 은 동보 란디비 당다라 네 쇼발로 아니 되네 네 조베 상제지 고모세 지로와 맞아 동보에나 됐을 때 쳐봐야래 배는 가서 젠데도 란데니 정원에 아니 dimba tombo de la che yude tombo jede teni je dimba ani di che de na rande teni dimba che gres ne sanje be ne gaso tombo rani sanje ne je sanje sa go se keni shangchu sen ye dimba ni ye jerin dang ani gansa rani ye ko pang ye dong le yang dimba de zha ge ma le di jing ga song ro wa
So now the enlightened beings, those who have gained the state of enlightenment, those who are enlightened, when we look upon us, when those enlightened beings looked upon us, it's stated by saying that it is through their experiences, by saying that without subduing one's own mind, there's simply no possibility. There's simply no possibility that one can subdue the mind of others. So therefore, one must first strive to engage in the practice that bring about subjugation of one's own mind. So it is therefore and then here, when we talk about the two aspirations with regard to the cultivation of bodhicitta, right? The bodhicitta consists of two aspirations. First, Shende Dunyi Dumpa, which means the aspiration for working for the wealth of others. And then second will be the aspiration of one's own purpose to gain the state of enlightenment. This is the sequence when you are actually engaged in practice. But once you have gained the state of enlightenment, then you have first fulfilled your own wish to gain the state of enlightenment. Having achieved the enlightenment, one will then be work for the welfare of other sentient beings.
Teta senchi bi shanchu semba asa da mandiwa jen mindiwa shene dani jimbala soba drubala rotu joro druba meba shanchu metobo shedang nande lejang zeden dongen jebi shed tona la ne ngojonzi tojo tenji konjuba techepa ne kawayin she sonde jana zewa nyenji chenbo yona ne deyi dongen segola desewala dongen da jena nyambi sen zangye mechoke deyi tola jugo so deyang muda rani to de la mashuba jen mashuba ne jen joa minupe jen je de juban debe muda rani diwa shawo dela ne juba nyimbo shagoba sonshin juba damba zone deyi loba sonbe ala sonshin ma xiao sen de ba de len ci de de ba de lo de ran yin de wa xiao song de
That's Let's read the text. Okay, the first stages of meditation also says the bodhisattvas who have thus developed the spirit of enlightenment understand that without disciplining themselves, they cannot discipline the others, and so involve themselves in practice of generosity and so forth. Without practice, they will not attain enlightenment. The Dharmakritis Dharmakrit's commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognitions says, in order to destroy suffering, the compassionate work at actualizing the methods. It is hard for them to explain the method and their results when this remains hidden to them. Those who have great compassion for others feel that needs to relieve others' suffering. To relieve it, the kind thought, may they be free from their suffering, is not enough. They must engage in the method that will bring it about. Now, if they do not first engage in those methods themselves, they will be unable to free others. Therefore, if you want to work for the others' welfare, you must first discipline yourself. So it is very clear, without attaining one's own achievement, which is the state of enlightenment, it's simply that it's not possible for one to work for the welfare of entire sentient beings. It is therefore in the ornament of clear realization by Maitreya, where it stated Semge Pani Shenrinchen, which means the mind generation for the welfare of others, to wish completely perfect enlightenment. So the first, you have the aspiration to attain state of enlightenment, then working for the welfare of other sentient beings. It is therefore, one must first gain the state of enlightenment. By following all these practices, having attained perfect enlightenment, one will then be able to work for the welfare of other sentient beings.
Gobi Tau Karandu Tadi, and it told the Zobi Sanchez Cobo Mato Mabate, Shayundi, and it Tata Kanta Togudu, Selayundi, De Topala, Rani Gil, Jala, Chitawas and the Sawaniji Chambo Rangila Chesadi, Jet Donge Yoa, Totugumena, Jet Dongele Jogoras. The Jet Dongele Jobala, Ranila Chachan Caragore, Sesona, Tombo, and Rani, and Zobi Sanchez Comonti, Tone Mato, and Jet Dongele Jodo. And just say
so it is very logical. It is if you think of if one thinks logically without disciplining or going through the process of disciplining one's own mind and discipline one's mind. It's simply that one will not be able to discipline the mind of others, period. So now, how do we, discipline the mind of others? How do we work for the welfare of other sentient beings in terms of disciplining their mind? What is the method that enables us to work for the welfare of other sentient beings? Is to gain the state of complete enlightenment. Without achievement of perfect enlightenment, it is simply not possible for one to, to establish entire sentient beings to the state of everlasting happiness. So therefore, first, one must engage in the practice which enables one to establish on the state of enlightenment.
Tell a Tandana sit the Tana, the Cosona Chiloda, said that don't use Jumbi Sharon, Tonal and Mojo city. Any so Niji Chambu ye, Senche, don't age now at the Tony, don't hit the Shamba, Meba Zobi Zoala, 털 때네 동해들 저 제거로스 네 대제발라 라니게 동해 제게 털때 라니라 미시아지 꼰지 차고야나 아니 제달라 털때 댄시고 말어 디시도 아니 라니 동보 디셰비지 가사치 차고도세.
So therefore, it says the commentary on the compendium of valid cognition, where it says, in order to destroy sufferings, the compassionate work at actualizing the methods, right? To destroy the suffering of others, it is first compassionate work at actualizing the methods. Without having those methods, we cannot, we cannot destroy the suffering of other beings. We cannot establish other beings to their lasting happiness. So first we must know the methods. If the method becomes obscure for oneself, how can we demonstrate? How can we, disclose this method to other beings?
되지. 되게 너네 시대 할래야 뭐 저런 수도 이제 되니 쟁여서는 할래야 뭐 진짜다 된바. 지 대바지 개체제 레면도아. 배는 터주 대주 꼬지면 털레숑이 주세나리 털레숑이 줄레숑이 네 제부대 배는 산제제 공부잖아. 산제제 공부인데 터양 주 텔레숑고에나 주대 가르레 터대 가르레 세대 셰고로. 된저기 터 주대 만화와지 땜발라 라니 때 해네 땜거마도 마신네 땜히고 말와 미시어 인자네 아니 도주 대주 꼬지바 대체반에 까와 인세디 근데 가제 비게도 저와 전에 대들마도 다시 계게요 말와 라니 차례도 만잖아.
It's very very telling if you really look at this particular verse of the Pramana Vartika, which is the compendium of valid cognitions, which is in order to destroy suffering, the compassionate work actualize the methods. See, what kind of methods or the skillful means or causes and conditions which leads to the state of enlightenment. So one must understand those methods. Without having a proper understanding of the method and the causes that will give rise to the state of enlightenment, it's simply not possible for one to, elucidate those methods and skillfuls, the causes to other beings. So first of all, one must engage in the practice to understand the proper method and cause which give rise to the state of enlightenment.
라바등가 저 게이션이 던을 거서나 게이션이지 세단데 뭐 거세에들 차진데 장구로와 니 게이션이 강 템바데니를 만노와지다 벤도소야다 지진데 때마토이나 랑가데 슈지 추로서로와 다 첸네 제원데네 벤의 체진의 주네 쟁바데 세제 제원데네 제와 데만의 추로래 제와 심한 변전로에 랑도 로바지 대소나 데네 레도자사 데네세 데네사는 베 저는 제로탄지 아마 당에 자이 So
it is therefore, it requires a very, it requires a qualified teachers, importance of relying upon a qualified teachers who propounds the teachings of the Buddha unmistakably. Because if one received the mistaken teachings and follow the mistaken path, then it is not possible. It is very difficult for one to be on the path, the proper path, life after life. You will be following the same mistaken path, and regardless of how much effort that you may have made, one will not be able to reach the state where we wish to be. So therefore, it is very, very important for us to rely on an appropriate teacher who actually teaches us the appropriate spiritual path, unmistaken appropriate spiritual path.
대치 인자는 대표 개 첨부 아니 저와 생일의 개 첨부 아니 저와도 저와 유비 토네 아니 저희 온게 아니 현다들 저투에 있는 바람이라 거바데 빼면서 개 첨부 대치 파쇼기 개견다 지지 라만로 어떤 데서나 동만 소소라니를 산동으로 라니게 지리 라니게 라네 투시데 라니를 가인데 지메와이나 딱 강저거서나 가인데 상주 생각하면서 가인데 게면도아 대체반에 고 가서 라는 고도 저한테 대체바 가와나 이게 라는 고도 전에 라니게 산나 동식 말어. 예전에 가서나 동도로와. 인치 미지 돼서 공지 제거야다. 아니 화장 제거야다. 그래서 배 개점으로 근데 개점에서 가서 세대기 대지기 다다 개쳤게 말이다. 소소기 셈바데 자체로 통해 소소 셈바데 시대에 되게 진짜는 산나던 세대기 유대체에 들어와.
So therefore, in order to protect other sentient beings, in other words, elevate other beings from the sufferings by means of one's own compassionate actions or the compassionate attitude. First of all, one must know what kind of the mental quality or the mental attitude that requires for one to work for the welfare of other sentient beings. In other words, protect other sentient beings from sufferings. So without having these experiences, there's simply no way that one can protect others from sufferings. And there's no way that one can engage in any kind of meditation, such as bodhicitta and compassion and so on and so forth. So therefore, to fulfill the wishes of others, to work for the other sentient beings, first one must familiarize oneself with those such practices by receiving the teachings. And so if those methods and the causes that give rise to happiness to other beings becomes obscure for oneself, simply there's no possible for one to work for the other sentient beings, to protect other sentient beings from the sufferings. So therefore, one must engage in the practice of meditation to familiarize oneself with such practices to elevate or enhance and develop one's mental quality, the spiritual quality.
배경에 되뒤지라고다 되는데 당 가서에나 세대 동네 준비 시작했을 아니 가서 동네 가려운게 동네 용어에서는 계속 시에서나 아니 다 차당 용어게 동네 용어를 세대 동지저투로 아니 다 간제 된저기 차당 용어게 동네 용어들이 좀 가르잖아 아니 랑진진 당진이래서 이게 좀더 비게 뽕뽕 다져서 배로 된 건지제
So why we are undergoing sufferings, in other words, simply it is due to our attachment and aversion. It is attachment and aversion which enables us to undergo sufferings, which makes us sufferings, in other words. And so this attachment and aversions are derived from self-cherishing and self-grasping.
된tri기 차단이 때 간제 요구도 세디 아니 단지 말이 빨리 요구도 세디 그런 내가 손보다 피게 되는 건지.
So it is important to identify where this the source of this attachment and aversion. Identifying as self-grasping, grasping at self, ignorance of grasping at self, in other words, is the source of giving rise to attachment and aversion.
된tri기 차단이 다 아니 지 말이 받을 정말 몇 번째 몇 번서에 타도 가르래 세달로인데 타도라 아니 된tri기 대송이 정원도 생겨데 타도라 거거로 와 개체시요.
So then this attachment and aversion derived from ignorance of self-grasping mind. And what is the methods or skillful means for overcoming it? So when such a question is asked, then one must be convinced that one has the knowledge to introduce this method to others. So now speaking about, establishing the method and skillful means for other beings. In other words, introducing the method of skillful means to others to overcome these sufferings. And what are the skillful means? What are the methods which becomes a remedy for those grasping ignorance of grasping at self, ignorance of grasping at self, and in other words, attachment and aversion is wisdom realizing selflessness and the spirit of enlightenment. In other words, the bodhicitta becomes the actual method or the cause.
Dendru yin zane, dendru ki chorangi ye thala go goya daya she, ni chorangi piki ki raja sanje tangi lama re doyi sanje dala tsewa ne yo. Ta dendru ki tsewa de yo biwa ki, ta dendru ki thaw dala go goya na, ni chorangi thaw de ma shewa ya na, piki dala go thugu re, thugu ma re se di, ni thugu ma re. De thugu me na karicha go re, thoma, ni rani ki, ni dendru ki thaw de she ba che, ni she ne, ni 피게들 시제 말로바 땡고르세 다때 땡게데 서르사나 아니 고조 고도 만징게데 사제마도 민두 세요디 아니 제시용으로 소소랑이 냥내기 좀 받지 제시용도.
So now with the compassionate attitude, we are looking for establishing other beings to the state of everlasting happiness. In order the ultimate state of happiness. So then to do that, one must have a proper understanding or the unmistaken understandings of the method, which becomes a cause or which becomes a method for overcoming the suffering of oneself and others. It is this purpose one should engage in a practice that is unmistaken, follow the practice that is unmistaken, teaching that is unmistaken. So then how do we actually, engage, how do we actually work for the welfare of other sentient beings? Because the method and skillful must not be as obscure for oneself. If this is obscure for oneself, there's simply no possibility that one can work for the other sentient beings. When you understand this, then only the Buddha, only the enlightened beings are able to work for all other sentient, fulfill the wishes of other sentient beings. So when you ask such questions, it actually sets up a proper steps mentally. How do we actually follow those practices? In reference to this, in reference to this, King of Concentration Sutra says that you should take practice to heart. Practice is said to be learning the training in the precepts associated with the Buddha Bodhisattvas vow after you have taken them. Therefore, it is very important that you are not mistaken. You are not mistaken about just what is entitled in taking practice to heart.
Teacher, there been a chamber. I saw in the pen a tapa deni jolo down, Joseph deni jolo, yoga, Consistilia, Toshi Malo, and you go then catch a boroa. How about the data on you said that Chulu then was raised machiba yore, and then Lama raised machiba yore, Jenny. Shuero, Tinja don't look like Conje, son of Corimano, thinking Juntil and Jutuina, and Kale maybe to the Zuba Sanje Copolan, Rotuagan, and Chache Zero. Mado yang ngaso ji roge ji la ka se gete ni senge ji ro chu ji la tini roge se ta ro yum se ma ro ya ta ne te se de ge ge cha re ma do chulu ge ta ju ge ta ge ji ji pho ro ge cha de yo ma ro.
So in order to achieve such a state of enlightenment, so it is important that one should follow the teachings of the teacher who teaches the unmistaken path and complete and unmistaken path, the complete and unmistaken path. Because we may find a lot of number of teachers in the different traditions. But when we're unable to follow the qualified teacher who teaches us unmistaken and complete path, then whatever the objective that you may have will not be able to accomplish. Your objective will not be able to accomplish. So therefore, following a qualified teacher who teaches complete and unmistaken teachings of the Dharma is very, very crucial. So here, if you look at this, the last, it says, in reference to this King of Constant Sutra said, take practice to heart, right? Take practice to heart. Practice is said to be a learning the training and the precepts associated with the Bodhisattva's vow after you have taken them. Therefore, it is this is emphasized very strongly by Lama Tsongkhapa by saying that, therefore, it is very important that you are not mistaken about just what is entitled in taking practice to heart.
Da jiro ma chi de son bi ka de la ya khoro rang la chinye chenge na khoro rang la chulu de le shu ne chinye chenge yin si da de di so yi de sa la jang ro ji tu ji ka den ye so so ge pi ge de la cha shi ka ran ya na yin ji me ji chulu de le shu ne la le to gas ke ma ro me ba de cha sa ro da
adi nge di tak ta shi chuma ro mi ji nge
Venerable ta jiro ma chen la re chen so bi ka de de la jung de le chinye che di ko ti jin ra yi ba ji ya chen ne tosan chewa yinsi roa ta disogi desala ta jangon wachi kangapa gori jishane sosogi di kare nolo ina ji tseri ta tembe tone chashi kare len yana len inchi miji chulu di nono zugu mare sona de lauchen je zechen jin song roa.
So at that time Lama Tsongkhapa was emphasizing this to his followers, his own followers. But now, here, regardless of whoever is following one particular teacher or not, or who have a different, types of belief systems and so forth. But His Holiness is always emphasizes that so long as that really benefits oneself to develop the positive quality of one's mind, it is not necessary that you follow the one particular, tradition, the Dharma tradition. You can, but without following, one particular Dharma traditions, you can take their advices to heart for your own, spiritual growth.
당 가서기 된저기 출루기 따주지 놓으러 판 주에 슈청보지 따와크네 깨참 시어잖아 아니 가서기 리텐 데이 ቶ 놓으러라 아니 나시 생이 저사를 여사마리 신주제 계속 된저야 아니 랑지 랑의 신생이 야와 슈청보시데 뒤걸로 강연도 되면도 아니 된저기 야와데 가려wan게 시기도 면도 그래서 인지미지 출루 지거면도 신주제도
So here now, without entering oneself into any kind of, religion or any kind of, religious tradition or believing in any kind of religious philosophy, what is important for us to understand or to analyze is to now analyze: is there any possibility? What we call as consciousness, so-called consciousness, exists within us. That is one thing that we need to ask ourselves and analyze, because that doesn't necessarily be devoting to, one should become one should be devoted to one particular tradition or religious tradition. But without becoming or entering into that particular religious tradition, one can analyze one can go through those analyzations of whether or not the existence of this consciousness, and having analyzed that, and do we have some the feeling of what we call myself and others.
다 된저기 신주파 시 단다시 차려 동안에 하 생에데 가니 가리 도는 건지 제거도 아니 단다 가서 이제 풍보라바 코노 소바 코노랑 레드에 아니 텔레제베 가 생에진 제다여 살이여서 말이 된저기 신주잖아요. 하 따이 도는 신주제도 다시 얘기 도는 단다 가서 줌은데기 내 땅이 도는로라 아니 다시 얘기 로비잖아요. 건지 제도 로아 간데도 세제 신주제도.
So now here, one can analyze oneself. When we think of, we have gone through the analysis of whether there is a possibility of existence of the consciousness. If that is possible, then how does the feeling of so-called I and others arises? So then one needs to probe further by identifying what is self. How do we identify ourselves as a self? Where is this self? Is this self really referring to your psychophysical aggregates, or there is something else other than your psychophysical aggregates?
다들 야샤는 판도서나 아니 셴라 제와생인데 간저 연구도 셴라 샘바 자체로 동에데 페도 가래도 세네지 이 제와생에다 된주기 공시 좀 여러 상식이 토노로 페도 가래도 세네 신주상의 지당 야 텐데 있잖아 다지 풍배들라 따져면은 텐데데 가래리 제제기 텐데 생기다가 좀 뭔통 나서게 캐내고 텔레제베기 텐데 차와 차실라 템바 아니 도베 따상지 텐데세베 간지제는 수베되는 레기도 세네 아니 따이 토노로 풍비 코노되는 야 사제 계시시 먹고 하잖아. 랑이 돈의 신주제도.
So one can one can analyzing through one's own body, within one's own body, one will be able to enter oneself into both a philosophical standpoint, both philosophical view, as well as the actual practices or the actual conducts of the actual spiritual conducts, in other words. So here, it's when we looking at oneself, when speaking about having a compassionate attitude, extending a compassionate mind towards other beings, how this compassionate attitude is coming into being, and how this compassionate attitude actually beneficial for others. And so then think about that, what kind of causes and conditions that requires for accomplishment of such mental attitudes. When speaking about that, then it is actually, you're actually going through you're actually, touching the teachings of dependent originations. So when speaking about dependent originations here, depending upon causes and conditions, and cause give rise to its fruition and so forth, it is gross level of dependent origination, something that is not obscure to us, right? But when it's speaking about the subtle level of dependent originations, depending upon, parts and dependent upon the imputed on the term and concepts, then that becomes really, really subtle. So this is actually what we should be analyzing and practicing ourselves.
ji sanjege na sa toma le kange triba den jile ni je sena ni di jensen de sena paru pole ni je segres ta nga so nambi jone tele shu chewa ji chopa de shi je donghe jangwa den ro chen je la ni ji ta ji sa na gi ji ka donghe so je jenchen me ba na nge gi sanje chen che ja la ni chanyon do joye ge ni je 단다 그 지 내보에 지보에 상담 해봐체 저번에 이제 동해 정화도 또 진짜라 아니 고 이제에서 이지를 상담다 근데 주소지 저 주체라 아니 또베 따상지 땡데레 만데와레 델레신 대소나 아니 개가 샤제 태그 말에서는 개체시 요리 딩드기 토노로라 참모토는 막 버네 아니 진센도도 민도 세네 아니 신주잖아 아니 남비 종이 슈천보기 따와 공변된 거네 아니 상제세네 요사요사래 요사마레세데 아니 소소는 고주네 아니 딩드기 예대는 줘야도 예대세거를 합쳐라
So normally when we speak about this compassion or the love or the sense of caring and sense of connectedness to others, most of us, we limit our understanding of compassion and the sense of caring for others is based on the other individual's condition. When you see someone who is undergoing suffering, such as suffering from sicknesses and so forth, you have some kind of feeling or empathetic feeling for this person or the sympathetic feeling for these individuals. Now, when speaking about the Buddhist point of view, when we speak about the compassion, we're talking about compassion towards entire sentient beings who are remaining under the power of the third level of sufferings, who all over was in a pervasive sufferings, who are remaining under the control of this, composites and pervasive sufferings, and who are undergoing the suffering of the three kinds of suffering without a break. So this is referring to all other sentient beings. Our compassion should not be limited only towards a certain individual who is undergoing suffering, but human beings or the sentient beings who are remaining under this third level of suffering, which is the pervasive sufferings. So at the same time, you can also think about, all those phenomena, the existence of all those phenomena are mere, it is not really beyond dependent originations. And think about how do we practice our compassion, towards whom we practice our compassion. How do we see all things and events? How do we understand our view of things and events? So this is how we should analyze ourselves, from the compassion towards dependent originations and the subtlety of dependent originations. With this kind of practice, then this will give you some kind of conviction, a certain level of conviction for achieving this state of enlightenment. So let's do the dedication by dedicating our mirrors towards the achievement of one's own enlightenment and that of other sentient beings, that may all this merits and virtue that I have accumulated by receiving the teachings from the method and skillful means to gain the state of enlightenment, may all sentient beings, may I establish all sentient beings to the state of enlightenment by introducing this method and skillfuls to gain the state of enlightenment. May all the Buddhists and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions bless me to be able to do this.
Sanje Sendo Mende Bewaye, Rogan Nanda Shena Chuba Shu, Chewa Gundo Yanda Lamu, Jimmy Jeje Bela Nushe, Sada Lanje Yande Razon, Doje Changi Goban Yando Shu, Yedan Guru, Mende Laga Naya Daya Mi. Nyambo Gashi Saba de Lomi Mare Kedon Jawa Nandren Jaye Ombo Da Juje Dema Sembe Sera Kundo Jambe Yanje Seve Jezone Dembe Reba Kyunanje Nene Jube Jena Nishi Jo Rage Jeje Tobe Nanje Shoda Zeve Jave Tauke Je Joye Je Mimba Seshe Jaye Temba Yuren Zenjo Je Temba Renje Choge Macho Chojo Nyamba Jebe Shodene Jeje Chembe Iro Choba Pinde Dede Sewa Sheba Sho Sejin Jaye Minjong Chene Le Du Shang Chu Nang Je Renbe Jang Tang De Nang Je Yilan Pinde Jaye Zeba Rin Zhong Je Nang Zang Zhu Bi Ting Jin Zhu Xi Sejin Sejin Men Dang Mi Gen Se Ro Ge De Jaye Han Wai Nada Nada Jawa Ma Ju Jin Kang Ce Jaba Chu La Chu Shi Xu Jin Zhu La Zun Ba De Yue Zi Tu Dian Nang Jia Da Du Zhu Xi Jin Zha Xi Jiang Zi Shu Gen Jiao Ju Jin Ju Zan La Mi Ku Ce Rao Den Jin Nang Ge Chen Ne Shu Zhi Jie Guan Lo Zan Dian Bi Zhen Sa Song Roye Mense Dado Nenjo Je Gang Zhe Zhawe Guo Yue Xing Pian Dewa Ma Lin Zhong Yue Ne Xin Re Zi Hong Den Zi Jia Su Xiao Bi Sin Di Bo Du Den Ju Je Jiang Bi Ba Yue Zhi Da Qian Ba Dang Gu Du Zang Bu Den Yang Den Jin Te Da Kun Je Je Si Da Lo Shi Ge Wa Te Da Dang Je Zhao Du Ye Suan Xi Bin Jia Wa Dang Je Je Huang Wa Gang La Chu Du Gang Wa Da Xin Ge Yue Zao Wa De Gen Yang Zong Bo Shi Shi Rao Du Ngo Wa Ju